Well, ladies and gentlemen, we are back in from the break on In My Own Words, the podcast, Touchdown Alabama Magazine, Stephen M. Smith, doing what we continue to do in this installment, bringing on distinguished guests, guys that know about the Alabama football program and other teams in the Southeastern Conference. And today, we bring on my man, Mark Passwaters, who covers Texas A&M for AggieYale.com, part of the Rivals Network. You guys check him out. Mark and the staff do an unbelievable job. Mark, how you doing today?
Just busy. We're at the Rivals 5-Star Challenge today in Atlanta, so we're just waiting for a lot of some of the best players in the country to show up and get here from the airport, which may be more difficult than anything else.
Waiting on the players, Mark Passwaters graciously joining me live here on In My Own Words. Kind of the first question I wanted to get into, Mark, was you look at this Texas A&M team and the fan base thought that success would come immediately with Kevin Sumlin as head coach, and you had the run with Johnny Manziel, and you really thought something would spark up from there, and did not happen the way fans of Texas A&M football would have liked it to. But you bring in a guy in Jimbo Fisher who is a national championship coach, one of the first guys from that Nick Saban tree, worked with Nick Saban at LSU, goes down to Florida State under Bobby Bowden and picks up where Bowden left off at. National championship in 2013, conference title that same season, helped Jameis Winston win a Heisman Trophy, put a number of guys in the National Football League, and now he's at College Station. And the Aggies believe so much in Jimbo Fisher. We're talking 10 years, $75 million deal there. That program, which has $500 million invested. What's been the vibe at College Station so far? I've been hearing that Jimbo Fisher's gotten this team to talk about how we want to win national championships, we want to win conference titles. What's been the difference in the chemistry between Jimbo Fisher just now getting down there and what was going on with Kevin Sumlin?
Well, I think that the biggest thing is Jimbo brings an element of toughness to things that Kevin Sumlin didn't. It may be too much to say that Sumlin was soft, but I don't think he understood the emphasis of toughness in the SEC. Fisher definitely does. He's going to ride these guys harder. They work harder. Practices are definitely tougher. But the buy-in has been tremendous. I mean, normally when you see a coach like Sumlin who had everybody on that roster as kids that he had recruited, normally you're going to see some fall off, some transfers. There haven't been any. The buy-in has been very, very good for the players. And certainly from a fan standpoint and observer standpoint, there's an element of wow. Just the way things are different, the way he approaches things, and certainly just the way recruiting's gone. I mean, Alabama has the number one class in the country, and A&M's right there at number 2.
Speaking on recruiting, a lot of what Jimbo has done, Mark, has stemmed from the coaches he's brought on staff. You bring in a new defensive coordinator. A lot of people thought when John Chavis came in, talking about his pedigree from Tennessee to LSU, you thought it would be a big boom at Texas A&M. And aside from the year that Myles Garrett and Deshaun Hall had, pretty much no big boom in terms of stopping the run. But new defensive coordinator comes in, a new strength coach comes in, and a lot of times the biggest part of that recruiting, the biggest part of getting stronger, winning championships, actually competing, starts with that strength coach. Alabama knows all too well about that in terms of having Scott Cochran on staff. Just speak to, Mark, the nuances in coaching with defensive coordinator coming in, a strength coach coming in, and the energy that has brought to this program.
Well, it started with the strength and conditioning coach. We went out and got Schmidt from Oklahoma. And you take a look at a guy from an S&C standpoint, nobody has a better pedigree. Look at all the guys that they've put in the league, especially on the lines from OU. So, he has been with Stoops from the beginning, going back to 1999. So you're looking at somebody whose reputation is unblemished, and he's just done an outstanding job now for nearly 2 decades. So bringing him in was a major coup. And I think that the difference between Mike Elko and John Chavis, there isn't that much in terms of nuts and bolts. They both run that 4-2-5 scheme. I think the two biggest differences really are the size of what Elko calls a rover as opposed to what Chavis had as basically a nickel. You remember Donovan Wilson played that 2 years ago. So you had basically a safety out there. He's going to use a linebacker, a guy around 220 pounds. Got somebody who's more capable of stopping the run, can also blitz off the edge. So you got that. But I think the biggest thing that it differs between Elko and Chavis is Chavis had his system. He was set with it, and he wasn't going to change it from week to week depending on who the opponent is. Elko, on the other hand, is going to adapt his scheme to the opponent. So I think that makes a very, very big difference because, let's face it, I mean, John Chavis has been a tremendous defensive coordinator now for, nearly a quarter century. But that scheme hasn't changed in a quarter century. So people started to adapt to it. He had some tremendous athletes at LSU. He had some pretty darn good ones at A&M. But at the end of the day, people had figured it out. They had moved beyond that, and he had not adapted. So I'm very curious to see what happens at Arkansas, to see if it was a fluke what happened at A&M, and he goes back to having the success he did at Tennessee or LSU. But I'm not expecting it.
And we are joined via the phone line. We are joined live right now with my man Mark Passwaters, who covers the Texas A&M Aggies for AggieYale.com, part of the Rivals Network. Once again, guys, check them out. They do an amazing job. As Mark right now at the Rivals 7-on-7 camp where the Aggies are concerned. Mark, what is the expectation, the realistic expectation for Texas A&M year one under Jimbo Fisher? By year 2, year 3, especially with how the recruiting is going with Louisiana and the state of Texas being the hotbeds that they are, by year 2 and year 3, I'm pretty sure the fan base expecting getting to Atlanta, competing for a Southeastern Conference championship, definitely getting into the college football playoff. But year one, as your ear is down there in College Station, what are fans realistically expecting for Jimbo Fisher and that staff?
Improvement. And that's very difficult to define. You take a look at what Kevin Sumlin did for several years, 8-4, 8-4, 7-5. This team might be much improved and still be 8-4 because you take a look at the schedule. It's the 5th toughest in the country. Clemson's coming in week 2. Week 4, they're in Tuscaloosa. You're on the road at Auburn. You're on the road at Mississippi State. Both of those are going to be extremely difficult games. Obviously, you close with LSU. So, and that's a team that they haven't beaten since they've been in the conference. So you take a look at that, it's a tough schedule. I think this would be a better football team. But there are some things that they need to work out. They've got to figure out who the quarterback is. They're going to go with Nick Starkel. They're going to go with Kellen Mond. The offensive line has to get better. And I think that Fisher's system fits what Jim Turner coaches much better. And you got to find another corner to go with Charles Oliver. You do those things, then most of the pieces of the puzzle are in place, but there are still some very big pieces that you need to fit in for this team to compete with Alabama, with Auburn, and with, honestly, Mississippi State.
Like A&M, Alabama trying to figure out who's the best quarterback for the job right now between Jalen Hurts and Tua Tagovailoa. We saw what Tagovailoa did in the national championship game, and that was special. We saw what he did in limited action during the regular season, and that was pretty special also. Jalen Hurts still doesn't lose you games, still a guy that's had 2 pretty good seasons despite the fact that got to mature as an overall quarterback and as an overall passer. When I look at A&M, you bring back Jamon Osborne, a freaking wide receiver, Travion Williams at running back, very shifty, very dynamic player. But you brought up, got to find out between Kellen Mond, who's a pure athlete, and Nick Starkel, of whom a lot of Aggie fans think have the better arm. We've seen the quarterbacks that Jimbo Fisher has worked with in the past. If you had to put your finger on it right now, Mark, who does A&M go with at quarterback between Mond and Nick Starkel?
That's a real tough one, Steven. I got to tell you. I mean, at the start of the spring, I thought it was Starkel slam dunk. He put up big numbers last year when he was healthy. He threw for nearly 500 yards in the bowl game. Just put up huge numbers, did pretty well throwing the football. Mond struggled, but he is certainly the better athlete. You're talking about the number one dual threat quarterback in the country 2 years ago. Mond took a very big jump this spring. He looked really, really good in the spring game. Starkel still threw for more yardage. He still looked like the more poised and professional quarterback, but he made the mistakes. He was the guy who threw the interception, which allowed the other team to get down close and score. And that's been the problem with him, is critical turnovers. But better pure passer, big arm, but he still made those mistakes. Mond didn't put up nearly the numbers, threw more interceptions, per attempt. But you're talking about a guy who made a major leap, looked much more comfortable at quarterback. And I think a lot of the credit for that goes to Fisher, because he works with these guys on his own. And honestly, I don't think, the last coaching staff, Noel Mazzoni especially, did a very good job with the quarterbacks. I thought they did a pretty bad job, frankly. They tried to tear Mond apart and make him into something that he really wasn't last year. And that's something that Fisher has done a better job with. I mean, obviously the guy needed to work on some mechanics, but you can't tear a quarterback's motion apart in summer practice and then expect him to go out there and play effectively in week one, and that's what they tried to do.
We're live on the line right now with Mark Passwaters covering the Texas A&M Aggies for AggieYale.com, part of the Rivals Network, joining me on In My Own Words. I got to ask you this one, Mark. The Aggies lose special teams coach Jeff Banks to the University of Alabama, and this is a guy in Jeff Banks of whom you look at Josh Lambo and Daniel LaCamera. He molded both of those guys to being 80% field goal kickers. Of course, Josh Lambo in the National Football League as we speak for the Jacksonville Jaguars. And then from the punting aspect, took Drew Kaiser, made him a star, All-American punter. And then Shane Trapuka from a walk-on to being a pretty standout punter in his own right. I mean, we all know the great Christian Kirk, 6 career punt return touchdowns. In your mind, what does Alabama gained, or what has Alabama gained in getting a guy like Jeff Banks? Because he's not mentioned among a lot of the talk. When you talk about the coaches that have been brought in, everybody's shining the light on Dan Enos, which is a good thing. The light's being shined on Craig Kulagowski and on Carl Scott and on Pete Golding. But what has Alabama truly gained in Jeff Banks that people need to zero in more on?
They got the best special teams coach in the country, point blank. You take a look at what he did with Kaiser and with Trapuka and Lambo and LaCamera. That's only part of the story. Last year, A&M blocked punts in 5 straight games. This guy schemes brilliantly. You take a look back at the Arkansas game. Arkansas had schemed it on returns that they wanted to basically block Christian Kirk into a corner and stop him from being able to break out. And for the first 3.5 quarters, they did a very good job of that. Banks saw something, went to the sideline, got his special teams together, re-schemed it with 10 minutes to go in the fourth quarter. And guess what? Christian Kirk took the next kickoff to the house, tied the game. I mean, that's the type of guy that he is. He adapts on the fly, just a real brilliant mind. And he's also an outstanding recruiter, so you got that benefit too.
Jeff Banks, looking forward to having a huge season this year with the University of Alabama Crimson Tide. We're joined by Mark Passwaters of AggieYale.com, part of the Rivals Network, talking Texas A&M. Mark, ultimately, is this team and is Jimbo Fisher the guy to really push Alabama and Nick Saban? Because the Crimson Tide, this is a program in need of a push. In years past, LSU was that team. Les Miles was that team. It was always Alabama 1, Les Miles, LSU at number 2. Arkansas has had some decent seasons, but not always consistent. Georgia and Kirby Smart starting to be that team in the East that can give Alabama a push in the West. Auburn, is a team that does well every third or fourth year. We really don't know what the marriage is like between Auburn and Gus Malzahn, because one moment the fans are clamoring, hey, Gus Malzahn's our guy. The next moment the fans are claiming, can we get somebody else better than Gus Malzahn? So right now, the marriage is kind of on a seesaw when you talk about Auburn and Gus Malzahn. Is Texas A&M the team that 2-3 years down the road, we can really see consistently pushing Alabama and Nick Saban with Jimbo Fisher at the helm?
Well, they're certainly paying enough for it. But if you take a look at things, there are a lot of opportunities for A&M to be that team. First, you have a great recruiting base. Second, you have an incredible alumni base. Third, their facilities are second to none. Fourth, you now have a national championship winning coach who did more with less at FSU. And I know that sounds very strange, but FSU was financially constrained. What people may not understand across the country is how much money Texas A&M University is playing with. We've got an awful lot of people who made an awful lot of money out in the Permian Basin, and they have been very, very good donors. And there are a lot of people that have made a lot of money in business in Houston and Dallas who are likewise very generous with their money. The renovation of Kyle Field cost $500 million. It's already been paid off. And that was in 3 years. So, you're talking about, just everything that needs to happen for there to be a competitor against Alabama. Honestly, on paper, A&M now has whether or not they can actually go and take that next step, move beyond where they were with someone, which was mediocre and being okay with being okay, to, okay, here we are, we're working for championships. Jimbo Fisher saying the right things. It looks like he's made the first right steps. Let's see if they can keep on moving them.
One of the things, Mark, that kind of rubbed a lot of people in Florida State the wrong way was how Jimbo would handle himself off the field. Great on the field guy, but sometimes he said things, he did things, whether it was to players, to guys on the administration staff, the different coaches, that kind of rubbed people the wrong way, including his quarterback, DeAndre Francois, who came out on Twitter and was like, Coach, you didn't tell me you was leaving. You didn't say anything to me, and now you just up and left. Is there a fear of that resurfacing in Texas A&M, or is the Aggie front office, is the Texas A&M organization thinking we're not going to have those types of problems with Jimbo Fisher?
Well, I think one of the big things right off the bat is that Scott Woodward, the athletic director at A&M, and Jimbo Fisher have had a very good relationship going back to LSU. They were together there when Nick Saban was there. So you're talking about guys who are familiar with one another. They understand one another. Honestly, you and I have been talking about Jimbo Fisher for a long time with respect to A&M. And then when it came down to making a decision to get rid of Kevin Sumlin, Fisher was honestly the only name that we heard. I mean, Scott Woodward put his chips on that, and he got it. The relationship that Fisher had with the athletic department at FSU soured because there were things that he wanted to be able to compete with Clemson, to compete with the University of Florida, now also with the University of Miami, that they weren't willing to provide. And I think that frustrated him. And honestly, with respect to DeAndre Francois and him being upset with Fisher leaving, if he didn't realize Jimbo was going, then he was not on Twitter at all for 3 weeks. Because everybody and their mom knew something was going to happen. And it honestly was probably set long before that. With respect to how things are going in College Station, so far so good. I guess the honeymoon is still going. We've gotten along with him fine. Everybody seems to like what he has to say. He's certainly more receptive to media questions than Kevin Sumlin. And, frankly, he's going to look good because he's not Kevin Sumlin. By the time Sumlin left, there was a palpable level of hostility between him and virtually everyone else. A change had to be made. He needed to get out for the good of the university, for the good of the program, and frankly for himself. He needed to go and get a change of scenery. And I think that him going out to Arizona, where maybe expectations aren't so high, it's good for him. But, it's just, you've got to, that's something that they need to work on. Just keeping that relationship good.
Last two from my end, Mark, and we are with Mark Passwaters, who covers Texas A&M for AggieYale.com, part of the Rivals Network. Y'all check him out. The first one of the two is geared toward the Crimson Tide here. If there's one person on this Alabama defense that you are highly concerned about next year when you guys play the Crimson Tide, who would that one player be?
All of them. I mean, it's really tough to say because there's just so much talent. That front line, in spite of the fact that they lost Han and they lost some of those other guys, that's just a tremendous bunch. And, that's really going to be where the rubber hits the road for A&M is they've got to be more physical up front. They've got to run the football. And, those front three, those big guys, if they can do what they did the last couple of years, then A&M's in a whole lot of trouble.
And the final one here, Mark, Texas A&M's defense. Who on this defense, or what number of players, or who are the players on this defense that will take the next steps forward, the biggest steps forward, as far as being those leaders, creating that pressure to the quarterback, most importantly, setting the tone? Who are the tone setters on defense for A&M this season?
I think there are a few guys you can look at, and for the first time, it's nice to be able to say that. I think their linebackers are about as good as any in the conference, and it's been a long, long time since you can say that. Tyrell Dodson and Otero Alaka, I think, should both get preseason All-SEC consideration. Kingsley Kiki has been solid in the middle for a long time. He's going to be there, but the guy to watch there is the other defensive tackle, Justin Matabwike. He took Dalen Mack's job in the spring, and this kid is just an absolute monster. He's a redshirt sophomore. He's just really starting to come into his own. They got a lot of depth in the middle, and that's something that they're really going to need. Landis Durham is the sack man. He's going to be at left defensive end. So those are the guys to really look for. I think that if you're looking for a player to take the next step, I'd look at safety and Derek Tucker. This is a kid that came in the middle of last year. He hits hard. He makes plays, and I think that he and having Donovan Wilson next to him is going to be very, very important to him. And I think that honestly, this defense is kind of running out of excuses for being good because they've got an awful lot of talent now.
We're looking at 8-4, Mark, 8-5, or more than 8 wins.
I think you're looking at 8-4 in the regular season, 9th win in a bowl game.
Nothing wrong with that. He's Mark Passwaters joining me live here on In My Own Words. Passwaters covering Texas A&M for AggieYale.com, part of the Rivals Network, talking Jimbo Fisher, Texas A&M. He likes every single player on that Alabama defense, calling the entire defense tough, and looking forward to seeing who wins this quarterback job between Kellen Mond and Nick Starkel. Ladies and gentlemen, as always, you can catch the podcast, Touchdown Alabama Magazine YouTube channel. Subscribe there for the best and up-to-date information, commentary, analysis on the Crimson Tide. For those that crave the content on the team you enjoy watching on Saturdays in the fall, that being Alabama. So Touchdown Alabama Magazine YouTube. Hit that subscribe button. Pushing out podcasts 3 days a week, so definitely getting you that information. But my man Mark, any final words on your end as you are down there getting that 7-on-7 action in?
I'm just kind of really looking forward to SEC Media Days in a couple of weeks. And then from there, everything's downhill. It's football time.
Absolutely. SEC Media Days. Will I make that trip and that crazy Atlanta traffic remains to be seen? I'm pretty much still hurt that they took it from Hoover. I mean, we're looking at Birmingham. The SEC front office is there. All the referees, officials are making moves there, and most of the Alabama media right there in that Birmingham area, and they took it dead to Hotlanta and that crazy traffic. So I will see what I could do about that situation. But as always, Mark Passwaters joins us live here on In My Own Words. For all of us here at Touchdown Alabama Magazine, I'm yours truly, Stephen M. Smith. Upon our return, folks, we will get back into top 5 at each position in Alabama in the Nick Saban era. We left off on defensive linemen. We will pick back up on outside linebackers. Don't touch that dial, folks. We'll be right back. It's your boy, Stephen M. Smith, host of In My Own Words, the podcast. If you are a fan of this show, then I encourage you to subscribe to the Touchdown Alabama Magazine YouTube channel. Also follow the brand on Facebook, Twitter, and other forms of social media as we continue to bring you the best in Alabama football and Crimson Tide athletics.